The soft murmur of high-end conversations filled the air of the luxury real estate office. The walls were lined with sleek, polished wood, glass, and chrome, the epitome of modern wealth. Crisp white floors gleamed under the lights, reflecting the perfectly arranged furniture. But despite the pristine surroundings, there was an undercurrent of arrogance, especially in the air around the real estate agent Derek. Derek's tailored suit was pristine, the lapels sharp enough to cut glass. His platinum watch caught the light as he checked his phone, his gaze scanning the latest figures, ensuring his life in the world of exclusivity stayed untouched. He was everything this market thrived on: privileged, polished, and perfectly poised. A bell above the door jingled as the next potential buyer entered. But this wasn't just another client. Ibrahim Traoré stepped inside the lavish office, wearing a plain black hoodie, faded jeans, and sneakers that had seen better days. He didn't look like the kind of person who belonged in such a setting. And that was exactly what Derek noticed the second Ibrahim walked in. The sneer formed almost instinctively, his lips curling up in disdain as he looked at the man standing just inside the door, trying to blend into the luxury surrounding him. Ibrahim walked confidently despite his appearance, his calm demeanor unshaken by the glances of judgment. Derek, unable to mask his contempt, set his phone down on the glass counter and made his way toward Ibrahim. "Can I help you?" Derek's tone was condescending, dripping with the belief that this man didn't belong in his world. His eyes swept over Ibrahim's modest clothes, then back to the showroom full of pristine, high-end properties. "I'm here to view the penthouse," Ibrahim replied, his voice steady, but with an edge of authority that seemed misplaced for someone dressed so casually. "The penthouse?" Derek raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "Well, it's not exactly in your price range, I imagine." He chuckled lightly to himself as though it were some sort of joke. Ibrahim didn't flinch. His eyes remained locked on Derek's, his expression serene as if he didn't hear the mockery. "I'm sure it's within my budget," Ibrahim said calmly, almost too calmly. Derek scoffed and motioned for Ibrahim to follow him. As they walked through the gallery, Derek continued his monologue, clearly attempting to impress with his wealth of knowledge about the place. "You see, only a select few can afford this level of living. The owners of this building are some of the wealthiest in the world. Not everyone can just walk in here and start browsing properties." Ibrahim, unbothered by Derek's words, simply nodded, his gaze lingering on the sleek surfaces and grandiose decorations of the showroom. It was the height of luxury, but to Ibrahim, it was all surface, shiny and bright but devoid of the true value that comes from people's actions. Derek opened a door to the penthouse, his hands sweeping the room dramatically as though he was presenting a priceless artifact. "This is it, the crown jewel of the building. Look at this view," Derek said with a smug grin, nodding to the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a sweeping view of the city. Ibrahim stepped into the room, his eyes immediately drawn to the skyline. He took it in silently, his demeanor unchanging. But Derek was waiting for a response, expecting awe, admiration, or at least some sign that the luxury had impressed Ibrahim. Instead, there was silence. "Not exactly what you were expecting, huh?" Derek said, the sneer creeping back into his voice. "You know, people like you don't typically end up in places like this." Ibrahim turned, his calm gaze settling on Derek. "And what makes you think that?" he asked, his voice low but firm. Derek didn't expect the question. His eyes flitted around the room, uncomfortable under Ibrahim's gaze. "Well, Derek stammered, his confidence cracking slightly. "People who have real money don't look the way you do." Ibrahim didn't move, didn't blink. He simply stood there, letting the words hang in the air. "Money doesn't define who I am," he said quietly, "and it certainly doesn't define what I can achieve." Derek laughed, though it was more nervous than genuine. "I'm sure that's true, but you're still wasting your time. You'll never be able to afford a place like this. You should leave before I have to call security." Ibrahim didn't respond right away. He simply looked around the penthouse once more, his eyes surveying the luxury that Derek so clearly prized. He could feel the judgment, the condescension, thick in the air, but he didn't let it affect him. Finally, he spoke again, his voice low but carrying a quiet strength. "You're right. I don't need this place. But you, Derek, you've just made a very big mistake. This building? It's not what defines success. It's how we treat others. It's how we show respect." The words landed like a slap. Derek's face flushed, his mind racing. "What are you talking about?" he spat, a mixture of confusion and frustration bubbling to the surface. Ibrahim stepped toward him, his calm demeanor unwavering. "You mocked me for what I wear, for the way I look," Ibrahim said, "but you know nothing about who I am or what I've accomplished." You've been so busy measuring people by their wealth and appearance that you've missed what really matters. Ibrahim turned to leave, his back straight and his steps firm. Derek stood frozen, stunned by the sudden shift in power. The luxury showroom, once filled with the hum of privilege and pride, now felt hollow. Ibrahim's quiet dignity had shattered the facade Derek had built around himself, and as Ibrahim walked out, Derek's world tilted, leaving him to question everything he thought he knew about value, respect, and the true meaning of success. The tension in the luxury showroom was palpable as Ibrahim walked past the rows of expensive cars, the hum of the overhead lights creating an almost eerie silence. As he stepped out through the glass doors, he could feel the weight of the eyes that followed him, some curious, others judgmental. Outside, the sun was still low, casting long shadows across the polished pavement. Ibrahim didn't need to glance over his shoulder to know that Derek was still watching him, probably with a scowl on his face, trying to digest the moment that had just unfolded. Ibrahim took a slow breath, the cool air washing over him, grounding him. Meanwhile, inside the showroom, Derek stood frozen, his thoughts racing. What had just happened? One moment, he was mocking a potential customer, confident in his superiority, and the next, he was standing there, exposed. Ibrahim's words had cut deeper than he wanted to admit. Across the showroom, a group of well-dressed clients continued to browse the luxury cars, oblivious to what had transpired. But a few of them, having overheard the interaction, exchanged uneasy glances. One of the women, in a designer coat and sleek sunglasses, glanced at Derek with a raised eyebrow. She'd seen the entire scene unfold. The look in her eyes wasn't one of sympathy, but of recognition. Something was off, and she could sense it. Derek wiped his face, trying to regain his composure. He'd been in the business for years, playing the game of status, using his power and influence to push people around. But Ibrahim's quiet confidence had shattered that. Derek was used to dismissing people based on their appearance. He'd done it countless times before. But this man had turned the tables. Back outside, Ibrahim was nearing the sidewalk when he was stopped by a voice. It was a familiar voice, but one he hadn't expected to hear today. "Mr. Traore," the voice called. Ibrahim turned to see a young man in a casual suit jacket, holding a smartphone in his hand. He wasn't alone. There was another person standing beside him, a woman with short blonde hair, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Yes?" Ibrahim asked, his calm demeanor never wavering. I just wanted to say that I saw what happened in there," the young man said, glancing at the woman beside him before looking back at Ibrahim. "I didn't realize who you were, but I saw Derek's reaction. He's one of the top managers here, and I've seen him treat people like that before. You handled it with, well, more dignity than he ever will." Ibrahim raised an eyebrow, a small, knowing smile forming on his lips. "It's nothing," he said simply, his voice smooth, almost soothing. "Just a reminder that respect doesn't come from the clothes you wear, but from the way you treat others." The woman nodded, her expression serious. "You're right. That guy Derek, he doesn't understand. I've seen him look down on people all the time. But what you did, that was something different." Ibrahim stood still, allowing the words to sink in. He could feel their sincerity, the recognition of what had just transpired. The young man continued, "I don't know who you are, but you definitely don't belong in there. Not because of your clothes or your status, but because you have something that they can't understand. Respect. That's what you've got, and it's more valuable than anything in there." Ibrahim's smile deepened. "Thank you," he said, his voice warm but still carrying that calm authority. He shook his head slightly. "But I'm afraid I'm not the one who's going to change this place. People like Derek, they need to learn the value of treating others with dignity, regardless of appearance." "Dignity?" the woman said quietly, as if tasting the word. "That's exactly what we need more of. Respect is a luxury that shouldn't be sold to the highest bidder." Ibrahim gave a slight nod, acknowledging her words. He turned toward the street, his focus shifting ahead as he continued to walk. "True luxury," he said over his shoulder, "is in how we treat one another, not in what we own." The young man and the woman exchanged glances before following Ibrahim with their eyes as he walked down the sidewalk. For a brief moment, the luxury dealership's glass doors shimmered in the distance. The once perfect showroom, now a place of uncomfortable truths. Inside the showroom, Derek remained at the counter, his face flushed with frustration. The weight of Ibrahim's words echoed in his mind. But before he could retreat further into his thoughts, the sales director, a tall, well-groomed man named Christopher, approached him. Christopher had witnessed the entire scene. "Now, what happened?" Christopher asked, his voice filled with a mixture of curiosity and concern. Derek clenched his jaw, refusing to meet his superior's gaze. He he came in here dressed like a nobody, and I assumed he was just wasting my time, Derek muttered, still seething. Christopher raised an eyebrow, his tone hardening. You mocked him? Derek hesitated, then nodded stiffly. Yeah, but he was just some guy in a hoodie, looking at cars he couldn't afford. I had to put him in his place. Christopher sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. You've really messed up, Derek. You don't know who you were talking to, do you? Derek's brow furrowed. What do you mean? Christopher's voice dropped, a hint of caution creeping in. That man you dismissed so casually. His name's Ibrahim Traoré. He's the president of Burkina Faso. Derek's face went pale, his stomach sinking as the realization hit him. What? Christopher nodded grimly. You've made a huge mistake. He's got more influence in his pinky than you've got in your entire career. This place won't survive if word gets out. Derek's world seemed to tilt on its axis. The realization that he'd just insulted a world leader, a man with far more power and dignity than he could ever imagine, sent a chill down his spine. But the worst part was the shame, the humiliation, that he was now the subject of mockery instead of the person he'd tried to put down. And outside, Ibrahim continued his walk, unknowingly sparking a wave of change in a place that had once embodied elitism and exclusivity. The ripple effects of his quiet dignity had only just begun. The silence in the room was deafening. Jonathan stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, his breath shallow as he stared at Ibrahim. The weight of Ibrahim's words hung heavily in the air, and for the first time, Jonathan felt a deep sense of guilt creeping into his chest. The showroom, once filled with the hum of luxury, now felt empty, not in terms of space, but in terms of meaning. The superficiality of the environment suddenly seemed so hollow. Ibrahim's calm demeanor only amplified the tension in the room. His gaze was unwavering as he observed Jonathan, a man who had built his life on dismissing people based on their status and outward appearance. And now, in front of everyone, Jonathan was being forced to confront his own arrogance. The luxurious world he had always thought was untouchable was now slipping through his fingers, all because of his inability to see the worth in others. You don't get to judge people like that, Ibrahim said, his voice steady but carrying the weight of years of experience, of leadership, and of a life spent fighting for what truly mattered. Just because you wear a suit and have the power to kick people out doesn't mean you have the right to degrade them. Do you understand? Jonathan's heart raced, his palms sweating. His world, which had always been so controlled, was unraveling in front of him. He had been in countless high-stakes meetings, had built a reputation around his sharp instincts and quick judgments. But this was something he hadn't prepared for. A man in a hoodie, unassuming, humble, and dignified, had just completely shattered his worldview. I'm sorry, Jonathan stammered, his voice cracking. For a moment, the arrogance that had defined him felt like a distant memory, replaced by a raw vulnerability he hadn't known he was capable of feeling. I didn't know. Ibrahim's lips curled into a slight, almost imperceptible smile. You didn't know. No, you didn't. But now you do, he said calmly. The man you just insulted? He's Ibrahim Traoré, the president of Burkina Faso, a leader of a nation, someone who's worked tirelessly to fight for his people, more than you could ever understand in your privileged world. Jonathan's breath caught in his throat. He staggered backward slightly, his mind racing. The president? He thought, his face flushed with embarrassment as the realization hit him like a ton of bricks. The man he had mocked, the man he had treated with disdain, was the leader of a country. And now, as his world collapsed around him, he was left to pick up the pieces of his pride. The tension in the room was palpable. Everyone was looking at Ibrahim now, their eyes wide, their expressions a mixture of shock, confusion, and awe. The other agents, the clients, the staff, they were all now fully aware of who Ibrahim was, and their gazes, once dismissive, were now filled with respect and admiration. Ibrahim, however, remained unruffled, his composure never wavering. I'm here to buy, he said, his voice soft but firm. Not to be insulted, but more than that, I'm here to show you that respect doesn't depend on the price tag of a suit or the title in your business card. It's something you should earn, no matter who walks through your door. Jonathan stood there, his throat tightening as the weight of Ibrahim's words sank in. Respect is earned, he thought. And for the first time in his life, Jonathan realized that he had been living in a world where respect was not given, but demanded based on wealth and status. He had been blind to the truth. That dignity was not something that could be bought. It was something that had to be cultivated through kindness, understanding, and humility. "I've made a mistake," Jonathan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I shouldn't have judged you like that. I didn't know, but I see it now. I'm truly sorry." Ibrahim nodded, his expression softening slightly. "Apologies are a start," he said. "But actions, Jonathan, actions are what truly matter. Your behavior today was not just an embarrassment to me. It was a reminder of how easy it is to dismiss people, to dehumanize them. And that should never happen again." The room seemed to exhale, a collective release of tension as Jonathan processed what had just happened. He had learned in the most humbling way possible that wealth, status, and appearance were not the true measures of a person's worth. It was the way they treated others, the way they chose to show respect. That was what truly mattered. "I'll make things right," Jonathan said, his voice now more steady, his resolve firm. "This will not happen again. I promise." Ibrahim smiled, a small but genuine smile. "Good. I'm glad to hear that. I came here looking for a car, but now I've found something more valuable. I've found that people can change when they open their eyes." With that, Ibrahim turned and walked towards the showroom's exit. The room watched in silence as he left, his presence still lingering long after he had gone. Jonathan, standing there in the quiet aftermath, took a deep breath, the weight of his actions heavy on his chest. "I'll make it right," he whispered to himself, his eyes fixed on the floor where Ibrahim had stood just moments before. And from that day on, Jonathan's life was different. He made sure to listen to every person who walked through that showroom. Because now, he understood that true luxury wasn't about money or status. It was about respect. And respect, as Ibrahim had shown him, was priceless. "I'll make it right," Jonathan whispered to himself, his eyes fixed on the floor where Ibrahim had stood just moments before. He clenched his jaw, the weight of the moment settling deep within him. For the first time in his life, he realized how easy it had been to judge others based on appearances, how quickly he'd dismissed someone without truly understanding who they were. The image of Ibrahim, calm and unwavering despite everything, echoed in his mind. Respect, he thought. Respect isn't something you can demand by force or wealth. It's something you earn, something that comes from how you treat others, regardless of their background, their clothes, or their status. "I've been blind to that for so long." Jonathan took a deep breath, steadying himself as he glanced around the showroom. The once luxurious and sterile environment now felt hollow to him. The expensive cars, the pristine floors, the polished counters, they all seemed so insignificant now, so fleeting. What good is all of this if the people who walk through these doors don't feel respected, he thought. With a sigh, Jonathan finally spoke aloud to no one in particular, his voice a mixture of determination and resolve. "I've been living in a world built on the wrong things. I've been focusing on status, on appearances, on making money, but that's not what matters. What matters is how you treat people, how you make them feel valued, regardless of who they are." He paused for a moment, the weight of his words sinking deeper. "I've wasted so much time judging people by their wealth, their clothes, their title, not realizing that the true measure of a person lies in their kindness, their ability to respect others. Ibrahim, that man in the hoodie, showed me that today. And I can't go back to the way I was. I can't let this continue." And from that day on, Jonathan made sure that every person who walked through that showroom felt seen, heard, and respected. The cars in the showroom may have gleamed with a pristine sheen, but it was the people, from the customers to the staff, who would be the true reflection of the luxury of respect. And Jonathan knew without a doubt that respect, unlike any luxury car, would never lose its value.